Frontline Gaming presents 40K Stat Center with your hosts, Val Heffelfinger and the Falcon.
Dust off your trilby, iron those vests, and throw on your favorite oversized pinstripe suit. The Gentlemen and Ladies GT takes Las Vegas at the Wasteland Games weekend.
Deus Volt? More like Deus Vomit. Tables and terrain took too much of the attention, but still the Stars of the South came out to cast dice at the Carolina Crusade.
ETC practice was in full swing as the Swedes secretly sorted out their strategies at the Spellemannens Sommarsnur.
Kawi.
I believe it's Kauai. Welcome to 40K Stat Center, everybody. And as you heard in the pre-tro, before the intro, turns out the Toronto Raptors are NBA champions. I'm sure at least 5 or 6 people in our audience actually knows A, what that means, and B, cares.
At least 6. My mother listens to this show.
So, holy shit, it's been 2 episodes. We're 1 away from a streak and feeling pretty cocky. Falcon, how does it feel to be adored by dozens of 40K tournament watchers?
Well, I'll tell you this. I often think about it at night as I go to sleep and stare at the mirror above my bed.
A vivid and haunting image for us all to savor. Apologies, of course, for the late release this week. I know it's Thursday probably as you're listening to this, but we should start settling into a Wednesday morning drop as the summer continues. We've doodled each other, organized our schedules. That's a schedule organizing app, not Peter looking in a mirror on his ceiling. So we should be well coordinated going forward.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't see why it can't be both. But regardless, thank you as always to everyone who has taken the time to reach out and provide us your feedback. Please, if you like the show, give a review on the Apple Podcasts app and sub to Signals from the Frontline so that you never miss a show from us, from Chapter Tactics, from Signals from the Frontline, really from anywhere. It's really great. We're going to hopefully at someday get our YouTube videos up so that we can deep dive into those dark webs and see what the real people have to say. But
yeah, we're waiting on Marinara to. That's awful. I can't do that to her. I was going to make that joke, but I just can't do it.
What, the Marinara joke? Like, she loves it.
I can't do
but
it.
She doesn't really.
It's evil. I mean, as far as we know, she hasn't listened to any of this yet, so...
She won't.
And she won't. But supposedly, we'll post this to YouTube, and that's when we get to find out just how bad we suck. And really, we're looking forward to it.
Yeah, 100%. And to be fair, everyone, in case you're not aware, Mariana is an absolute saint, and the best color commentator that I've ever had work beside me, other than Mr. Val Heffelfinger.
Goes incredibly with shrimp. Now, Peter, you've made some improvements to 40kstats.com this week. Care to share?
Yeah, so this week I went ahead and made a few little adjustments. I added a blog that doesn't work, so hopefully that'll get fixed by tech support someday in the very near future, so you'll be able to get full updates and have an RSS feed for when I do update the site. And secondly, and more importantly, I've added a number of new filters. So now you're going to be able to check out stats based off of significant Warhammer rule changes. So example, Spring FAQ now is a filter that's available. You can tap that and see everything that's happened post FAQ versus pre FAQ. I've also added filters to TWIP and average round loss. So now it's just a date filter, but I will be in the next day or two adding filters for like the FAQ and for specific tournaments, so you can see how different factions perform across the board now, event to event. And lastly, something that a lot of people have been asking me for, so I put it in even though I don't care as much. I do have a little bit of interest, but that's just because it's another number. I've added the ability to track mono faction versus soup for all of the
I'm sorry,
different...
what was that second slur you uttered there?
Oh, I apologize, Val. For mono faction versus multi-faction
Multi-faction, excellent. You see, I guess our listeners probably don't know about the 40K Stats Center style guide. Here at the show, we think that the term soup is a pejorative. You know, we're here to play games here, folks. We're not going to engage in scrub talk. We're not going to call things cheesy, and we sure shit ain't saying something soupy. So it's multi-faction, mono-faction, more than one faction, however you want to call it. Just don't judge people because they bring the best choices to their list. You know what I'm saying?
A1. I'm behind you 100%. And shockingly, I didn't realize this, but I come from a place where A1 means really good, and no one else knows what that means. And it always bothers me when I say it and people are confused. But that's just some kind of weird geographic lingual thing going on. Let's move on to the actual topics.
Yeah, the actual topics are probably a decent one to get onto, but I will beat this horse slightly more to death. If you want some more in-depth coverage on all the post-fact meta-analysis, make sure to double back and listen to this week's chapter Tactics. Falcon patiently leads Pablo and Sean on a magical journey of statistics and analysis while doing his best to anger every Dark Angel player that has ever lived. Now, as Peter mentioned, we do actually have quite a fairly tight show today, only a couple of events to cover. So why don't we get on with it?
First event on the docket, Gentlemen and Ladies GT. 67-player event. It's in its third year. Formerly the Gentlemen's GT, it has matured to become more inclusive, if not grammatically ham-fisted, the Gentlemen and Ladies GT in Las Vegas, Nevada.
Yes, the second significant 48K event in Sin City, except during a time of year where being outside means you'll die faster than your soul can escape the horrors that surround you.
Hosted at the lovely off-strip Gold Coast Hotel and Casino, known for its $9.99 breakfast buffet featuring a, quote, impressive spread of savory and sweet breakfast foods and unlimited juice, coffee, and soft drinks. Emphasis mine.
The GNL GT also sells itself short, reaching a total of 67 players. It is a major by any definition, specifically the ITC definition. Perhaps it's time to drop the awkward phrasing and encourage this event to call itself by its true nature. I'm dubbing it the Milady Major.
Players from throughout SoCal, and I'm sure other places, made the track to participate, including Jeff Not Matt Damon Robinson,
Reese the Ring Wraith Robbins,
Frankie Call Me GM Papa,
Ray Awooga Ayumata,
and James somehow still allowed in Nevada, Carmona.
And local flavor Josh Allcaps Jenny, and Ben actually lives in Vegas, Jarek. Pretty unusual. Now, it should be said that coming into this tournament, there was one clear favorite, declared by himself loudly and proudly on multiple podcasts, Reese Richard Robbins. It was openly declared that no man could stop him, but he failed to anticipate the salty wiles of famed Las Vegas mistress, the Margarita. Regardless, he was able to execute a flawless drop from the tournament, going a perfect 0-0 after seizing the initiative for Raylo Carrera, then skipping his own shooting phase, nearly falling asleep at the table, and becoming distracted by a Golden Girls-themed slot machine. It wasn't all tragic hubris, though. Many top players came to play, and what better place to start than Vegas' own Ben Jarek. Ranked second in the Orcs faction, Ben has been steadfastly running a rather unusual Orc build and doing exceptionally well. He was, in fact, the frontrunner going into day 2.
So yeah, let's quickly go over Bendrix List. One thing to note, Ben is solidly behind the freebooters. So first off, he has this freebooters battalion using the Dreadwog specialist detachment with a big mech with custom force field, a big mech with a souped up shaka, and a war boss with power claw and shooter. He has 28 orc boys with shooters, and then 10 Gretchen, another 10 Gretchen. His heavy support slot includes 2 Gorkanauts and 6 mech guns, specifically 4 smasher guns and 2 tractor cannons. He then has a second freebooters battalion with 2 weird boys and another 30 Gretchen, and he tops it all off with a freebooters air wing with 2 Daka jets and a Waz bomb blaster jet.
And that list managed a 5-1 showing, often in crushing fashion, with 4 scores above 30 and a 40-point game in round 2. You know, I've actually spoken with Ben a lot about this list in various group chats around the internets. Go ahead.
Who really hasn't, though?
You know, he gets around. I mean, let's remind everyone at home, Ben Jarek has an orc tattoo on his calf. This guy is serious about orcs, and he's serious about this list. So, I mean, I've thrown a little shade about it. But, I mean, the results don't lie here. Why don't we listen to Ben talking about this list build?
So, the core concept of my list is based on the little-known orc clan known as freebooters. The freebooter trait is when a unit kills an enemy unit in any phase, All units within 24 inches of that unit get +1 to hit. This is both in shooting and in fight phase. So I choose to abuse that in the fight phase with units that already have modifiers like Dock Jets hitting on 4s, now hit on 3s, which proc for other units that are ridiculous like the Gorkanaut hitting on 4s. So you typically set up something like Met Guns or Shooter Boys or Dock Jets to kill something on turn 1, like a small chaff unit, and then the rest of the army kind of builds off of that.
Now, I know Ben was suffering from a little bit of road noise there, but I hope you all kind of caught a little understanding about how the core list mechanic works. It still, to me, seems bullshit. So I asked him a follow-up question, and here he goes, patiently explaining in some more detail why that's actually scary.
I do run into a lot of people who have zero expectations of this list and don't know what to expect and are suddenly getting tabled or don't position correctly against it or don't expect the pilot to be competent. I do run into that sometimes. It's a snowflake list, I'll be honest, and I absolutely love it. The MVPs, it really depends on the matchup. More Dacking a Gorkanaut definitely picks up Plague Bears all day, where sometimes you need to lean on the shock attack gun shooting twice to pick up armored units because that neg 5 AP, d6 damage, +1 to wound. So it's kind of pick or choose, but I guess the biggest highlight that people stare at when they see my list are the 2 big old Gorkanauts that kind of work as linebackers.
So, are you sold? Do you believe in the Freebooters orc list? Have you seen this out in the wider meta, attempted to be used aside from this insane person?
Yes, Ben's not the only one that's tried freebooters, although I will say that he's the most successful. A lot of the lists I see that try to go pure freebooters are either copying Ben's list, or at least his version from Scorched Earth, which I believe was maybe slightly different, or they go in their own very fluffy way and really, really underperform. I've watched Ben play this list in person at BAO. You can see why it's a solid list. Yeah, I mean, I'm not 100% sold, but the results speak for themselves, right? I mean, he's definitely a competent player, and having chatted with him over a decent supper about orcs, he's got a lot of theories.
Yeah, I think originally as the book came out, a lot of people assumed that, the needing to proc something by killing a unit just seemed like why add a condition to sometimes unreliable orc things. And clearly, I mean, he's had a lot of success. Correct me if I'm wrong. I do believe he won an event with it.
Yes, he did win the Scorched Earth Open a couple of months back.
So the full-blown GT, so this is not an accident, and he does it against some excellent competition. However, this was not to be his weekend. He did take an L to another player that we're going to be going a little bit deeper on, Dan Olivas. But first, he's just going to talk a little bit about the event and then talk about that loss to Dan.
As far as the event overall, I loved the event. It was great. It was hosted by War Room Games and Hammerhead Games. War Room Games happens to sponsor my team, so I'm a little bit biased. I do love those guys. Ray Prado, Tony Myers, those are the 2 guys that definitely make all this happen. And through their employees and through delegation, we had a really great major. I placed really well, my only loss being to number 1 Eldar, Dan Olivas. He creamed me on stream, so I'm not going to care to post that link. But it was a case of I did 4d6 damage with rerolls to a Wave Serpent and did a total of 3s.
Yeah, so an unfortunate draw against Dan. Dan was running, another list that I think maybe at first blush doesn't pop off the page as, what you might think of when you think of scary Eldar. I mean, we're definitely going to see a scary Eldar list later on in the show. But why don't we run through Dan's list here? Another 5-1 effort here from Dan. He actually gets to the second to last table before suffering his first loss against the fitting and out of control Jeff Robinson. So why don't we hit that Eldari list?
Daniel Olivas, he brought an Ally Talk battalion with a Farseer Skyrunner, a Warlock Skyrunner, 2 minimum units of Rangers, and a 10-man squad of Storm Guardians with chain swords. He then had 3 minimum 3-man Dark Reaper units, all with Tempest Launchers, 2 Wave Serpents, 2 Archons in a mixed Drukari detachment, 3 minimum units of Kabalite Warriors, and 3 Venoms, and he topped it off with an Inari Supreme Command Detachment, with an Otark Skyrunner, with the Index Banshee Mask, Fusion Gun, and a Farseer, as well as the Incarn.
Yeah, no, I am famously bad at Warhammer, but does this list terrify you? Like, reading that, if you were to, wouldn't you be a bit relieved when you saw you were drawing Eldar, and like that was what was presented against you?
So yes and no. Because I know the quality of player that Daniel Olivas is, just seeing his name would often make me, the beads of sweat start to get on my face. And I am absolutely terrified with most of the lists that I make about Tempest launchers. So the fact that he's got 3, regardless of if they can double shoot or not, that will always get my heart pounding. And then it's just a matter of his like Otark Skyrunner trickery, which I'm sure he'll discuss in some of his clips.
Over to Dan.
The key concept to my list is a couple of things. Multiple threat vectors from multiple directions, pre-game flexibility, and it's a list that takes and holds the initiative for most of the game. It's usually starting in turn 2 or 3. I allow my opponent's initiative to start. It doesn't have a linchpin in it. A lot of people think the Incarn is the linchpin, and he is as far as the scariest single model in my army, but he's actually not essential to my plans ever, or not ever, but rarely. And so you can trade with him if you have to. So if I have to make a favorable trade with him, it's certainly available. The multiple threat vectors allow me to keep initiative and to keep my opponent reacting to my decisions, or to force my opponent to make decisions that I can then capitalize on.
Peter, you mentioned that the thing that you would be scared of is Dan. And I noted that Dan used a term like multiple threat vectors, and I too am now afraid of Dan. Let's allow him to continue now on whether or not this list is in fact scary.
So in answer to whether or not my list looks scary, I think the main thing people forget about Eldar lists is it's not just flyers, and it has a lot of versatility. I try to build lists first and foremost that use models I love, and so that's sort of where my list building stuff starts. And then I try to use something that isn't popular or isn't as popular. So the threat level for my list exists in a whole bunch of subtle ways, but it helps me keep the initiative in the game and helps me to give keep my options open, which allows me to try to outplay my opponent. So from a scary point of view, if you play me a couple of times, what you'll learn is that I don't have one plan. I have a whole bunch of plans that sort of dictate your responses. And if you don't play me very often, you'll find that you assume my plan is one thing and then I do something very different. So that's where the scare factor comes in from that list.
Right. So I think conclusively the scare factor of Dan's list is not the list itself, but Dan. And what better counter? Running into Jeff Robinson, a man who takes no shit. Would you agree, Falk?
Oh, absolutely. If you want to play cagey with somebody, Jeff Robinson's probably not the one to try to pull shenanigans on. Not just because he doesn't take shit lightly, but also because he very frequently asks the right questions at the right time. So it takes a good amount to surprise him.
So Dan did succumb to Jeff Robinson in the 5th round. So, I mean, Dan, kudos, made it very far in this tournament. Jeff, now entering the story, obviously goes 5-0. He makes it to a top table, and as advertised on Chapter Tactics about a week back, was running a list build that has been absolutely terrorizing on the East Coast, piloted by one Austin Wingfield. Why don't we just read the list? It's not particularly long, so why don't we read the list and we can have Dan discuss how that game went for him versus Jeff.
Sure. So Jeff Robinson's list, I've talked about it a few times in the last few weeks, is a mixed demons battalion with the Contorted Epitome, a Poxbringer, 2 units of 27 Plague Bearers, and a unit of 3 Nurglings. He then has a mixed Heretic Astartes Supreme Command Detachment with Ahriman, a Master of Executions, and a Crimson Slaughter Sorcerer, along with Mortarion. And then he has a Flawless Host Supreme Command Detachment with the Soul Forged Vigilus Specialist Detachment with 3 Lord Discordants.
So let's go over to Dan again, and like I said, he's just going to discuss how that game went against Jeff.
My round 5 game against Jeff Robinson was amazing. Him and I have played 3 times now. He kicked the crap out of me the first time, and I've had 2 1-point losses to him. So I am 0-3, which is very frustrating for me. The key turning point from my side is I set a trap. I believe it was turn 3 that I didn't need to set. It had very low payoff and very low risk, but it was essentially a neutral play that I didn't need to make. Had I kept playing my game, I think that would have tightened that game up to a tie or possibly a win for me. He didn't make any mistakes that I could capitalize on. He made one very small mistake, and I was half an inch away from capitalizing on it. So, that's kind of how those games go sometimes when you play a guy like Jeff. He's not going to give you a whole lot of openings. So that was the only real key turning point, was me setting a trap that didn't work out and cost me the game.
Thanks a lot, Dan, for your insights. Those were some excellent comments. And, of course, he bounced back in the final round, wound up 5-1 in the tournament. On the other side of the bracket, the final remaining hope for Frontline Gaming was trudging his way to a similar 4-0 record. The original greatest Warhammer player of all time, Frankie GM Papa, and his Gene Stealer cult came to face off versus the war boss himself, Richard Kilton. Okay, so let's pause things here and maybe have a quick look at what Frankie was running with his Gene Stealer cult.
Okay, well, this list is absolutely bonkers. It's a list I've seen once before, but maybe a little more all-in even than that person had played. It's a Rusted Claw Battalion with an Acolyte Icon Ward, a Patriarch, 3 units of 10 Brew Brothers, a Keller Morph, and then 3 maximum squads of Attilan Jackals with full 3 Wolf Quads each, all of them with shotguns, some with grenade launchers, no demolition charges, which is often something you'll see with the Attilan Jackals. Frankie took not a 1. And then he had a second Rusted Claw Battalion, this with a Jackal Alphys, a Magus, 3 units of 10 Brood Brothers, and a Gene Stealer Cult's 4-armed Emperor Battalion with an Acolyte Icon Ward, a Primus, 1, 2, 3, 4 squads of Acolyte Hybrids, all with 4 Rocksaws, and a Clamavis.
Good Lord Almighty. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have noted that in the previous segment, I wasn't able to get Jeff for today's show. This was all on my bad. I just didn't message him in time. He was very willing to do things, but he's a busy man, as you all are very aware. So I was desperate for some killer content, and I decided to bother Frankie at work. He might be too hot for signals, but he's spicy enough for Stat Center. So let's see what Frankie had to say. This is going to be a little departure here, Peter. I hope you can got a glass of water, maybe sit back. There's going to be a little side interview here with the famous Frankie GM Papa.
Frontline Gaming, this is Frankie.
Hi, Frankie. How are you today?
Doing well.
We've seen a couple different Gene Stealer cult archetypes on the show already. What do you think makes your list a little different from other things that we might be seeing around the meta?
Yeah, so I'm running 45 of the Jackals, basically using them to take up board control and throw a couple mining lasers in there, maybe pluck off some wounds of wyverns and pesky vehicles in the backfield. But mainly I use them to soak up the fire for the rest of my army, keeps my characters safe, and I've been having a lot of success with that with those units. They're hard to kill, and they are able to get objectives and stay on the board, which Gene Stealer Cult really struggle with from what I've been finding. And then I run little 10-man units of Acolyte Hybrids, a little bit different than what you're seeing in the meta right now. A lot of people are running the hand flamer units. I'm just running the 4 rock saws in the unit. And I find that they have enough punch to pretty much take out whatever you need. And they're not too expensive going into those units. So I'm able to run 4 of those, which give me some flexibility in deep striking in different turns. So a little bit different than what you're seeing. People are running the big 20-man unit of Acolytes. They're running the demo charges on the Jackals. Mine's kind of like a hybrid of those kind of lists.
Nick Nanavati, he switched from Orcs over to Gene Stealer Cult. So he's running what Pablo called the Muscle Beach. So lots of the big guys. He said he's having trouble optimizing his list because every choice he makes is winning.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on the power of Gene Stealer Cult?
Yeah, definitely. It's hard to find a stinker unit in that codex. They're all really good. They all do their jobs very well. I find the hardest thing with Gene Stealer Cult is resilience and deciding when to bring them on the table. If you bring them on too early, you sacrifice that unit. They die very easily once people start shooting them. But yeah, I definitely agree with Nick. It's really hard because you pick a unit and it just does amazing, and then you don't want to take it out of the list because it does so well. But there's plenty of other units that you'd rather have in the list. So definitely, I agree with Nick 100%. I really like the aberrant units too. I just wanted to take something a little bit different. I've been seeing a lot of people are running like 2 to 3 aberrant units, which are pretty nasty.
If you had to pick one of your many multi-armed children, what would you say was your MVP unit, one that you wouldn't think about taking out of your list?
I would definitely say the Kellamorphs. Kellamorph is really strong, especially if you're able to screen them out with like Jackals or Brood Brothers. Once it comes to like turn 4 or 5, he's able to snipe out really important either vehicles or characters or units that have been pesky throughout the game. So I found late game Kellamorphs were MVPs.
And final question, you gave Rich Kilton, the eventual winner, what looked to be his first real test of the whole weekend. He was kind of just rolling up until he ran into you. Share a highlight or the turning point from that game from your perspective.
Yeah, Rich had a big turn one. His Ludas rolled a 1 for their shots. He decided to keep it, and those 15 shots ended up hitting like 25 times. So had a pretty good shooting phase there. Was able to wipe out quite a few of my Jackals. And then on that same turn, he was able to tri-point a bike. And I didn't even view the tri-point as possible. So I didn't pull my casualties correctly. So unfortunately, they were fearless because of the Patriarch. And then he was able to tri-point a bike, and that was all she wrote there. I wasn't able to shoot him with all my Brood Brothers and Kellamorphs and stuff that I had in the backfield. So I had to go into combat earlier than I wanted to, which meant my Acolytes were left out in the open to get shot. So he played a very smart game. He did this double swing so that he could do those tri-points, and he was rolling spectacular. And Rich is an awesome guy, great opponent, so I'm really happy for him that he was able to pull out that win.
Yeah, I mean, you did really well if you're saying it was a first turn thing that really swung you, because you kept that thing close.
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, it came down to the clock. Rich ended up running out of time on turn 3, I think, or 4. But it was towards the end of the game, wow. So I was able to rack up some more points and make it close.
The clock is the Orc Codex is probably hardest counter.
Definitely. And Gene Slayer Colt, funny enough. I consider myself a pretty fast player, but this tournament I was taking it up to that 3-hour mark almost every game. So,
Frankie, anything you want to add before I let you go back to your day?
No, that's it. Thank you very much for having me on the show, and appreciate it.
You want to talk some shit about Reese?
No, that's too easy. That's like a low-hanging fruit there. But no, thanks for having me on the show, man. Appreciate it.
An absolute pleasure to have Frankie on the show. What did you think about his recap there, Peter? Are you awake?
I am definitely awake. I almost lost my voice. I was so excited listening to him talk about his games and his list.
I still think that's the second best fake last name on the internet right now.
Oh, for sure. Right after Colossimo.
Now that brings us to the list and player we've all certainly wanted to hear about, the great war boss himself, OG 40K YouTube personality, a man that literally carries the mail and delivers the pain, Richard Kilton. Now, I've been making you read all of the lists.
Yes.
Did you want one off?
Well, you've been doing a lot of talking. I just listened to you somehow talk to Frankie Giampapa as if it were live. It feels like it was happening while we were on this interactive Skype call. And I think I can do it. Unless you really want to, because I know Rich is a close personal friend of yours. He's a friend of the podcast. He is absolutely one of the greatest players I've ever had the pleasure of playing against myself, and that's a high bar I'm setting. So I don't mind passing it to you.
I fully encourage you to do Rich's list a lot of justice here.
Excellent. I'll do my best. Richard Kilton. He showed up to the Gentleman's GT with an Evil Sons Battalion detachment. It had a War Boss and Mega Armor, a Warlord. He also had a Weird Boy. He had 2 units of 30 boys with Sluggas and Choppas, and then a unit of 10 boys with Sluggas and Choppas, and finally a unit of 25 boys with Shooters. He had a Knob with a Wog Banner, a truck, which is out of the ordinary for most of the most competitive lists, but knowing Rich Kilton, it's just how he likes to play. He then had a Death Skulls Battalion detachment, Dreadwog specialists, with the souped-up shock attack gun for his Big Mech, a Warboss on Warbike, 30 Gretchen, Mad Doc Grotznik, and then a Bad Moon detachment with a Runt Herd, a Big Mech with a custom force field, a Weird Void, 38 Gretchen, and 15 Lutas.
I mean, that is a lot of really solid, awesome pieces. Would you not agree?
Yes, it's a lot of all of the good things that orcs like to bring to an event. Except the truck, but I mean, there's definite use for a truck.
You gotta snowflake a little bit. Now, I mean, he'd be able to, hide his Mega Armor Warboss in there, a Weird Boy, the Wall Banner, keeps him moving around. I mean, there's lots of benefits.
Yeah, if I know Rich Kilton, it's mostly to modify the amount of drops he has in his list, depending on who he's playing against.
So we're basically going to give the floor to him to tell us about his list and his experience at the 2019 Milady Major. So why don't I just kick this on over to Rich. He's going to go into his list and how it's evolved a little bit since the Codex release.
Play that clip.
So Val, my list has not changed as far as the purpose of my list. My list is a fighting list, but some of the units that I've added have changed significantly. I found that when I put Lutas into my list, it forces the opponent to engage. And that's one of the real assets that I have found with the Lutas is you can't just kind of sit back and try and just shoot me off the table because the Lutas can do that too. And they also take out some of those key units that cause orcs trouble in particular. I'm going to tell you a little more in the next section about why I make some of the other choices I make. But that's what the Lutas and the shock attack gun do, is they make it so that people have to engage.
Now, if Rich had his druthers, I'm pretty sure he would run nothing but boys, and that's about it. And really, the innovations to his list have been adding the shock attack gun and the Lutas. I mean, I know those are things that, certainly the Lutas anyway, are becoming a thing that might be leaving a lot of orc lists. For Rich, this is a bold new innovation.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like he's always one step ahead, but on the list side, he's one step behind, and it always surprises me with how well he does.
It's almost as if knowing your list and playing it really well makes a difference in 40Ks. He's just going to actually talk about, because a lot of times I think we saw a couple weeks ago when orcs had success, Lutas were dropped from a lot of lists, and immediately the thought is, well, I guess that means you don't have to invest all those command points. You can invest them more in the boys. So here he's going to talk about how he actually makes those choices between the two.
Managing command points in 8 it's a huge issue and a really important skill. So as I've practiced and things, you have to think about what you're going to need to do. If you really feel like you're going to need to recycle one of your units, you better keep 5 points. And that really paid in the last game against Jeff. Is there were a couple of times where I could have shot my Lutas or the shock attack gun with more DACA, or shot twice, and I chose not to because I knew I might need those command points, and I sure did there at the end when I kind of overcommitted with the boys, and one boy survived, which was very fortunate. That is one of my superpowers. I am lucky that one boy surviving meant I got a 223-point unit back on the table.
I may have alluded to Rich Kilton absolutely stomping people all the way until he met Frankie. Rich is a genuine, nice human being. He disagrees a little bit, so here's him talking about his march to the top.
I don't know that I would agree with you that my road was smooth sailing. Alan Hernandez is a good player. He's probably one of the only guys in the competitive scene that's older than me. But we had a nice old man sit down and played our game, and his list was actually hampered because he didn't bring his Zangors. He forgot them on his painting table, so he had to make a change there. And then I played a really great night list that he just made one deployment error that cost him. And then Richard Cozart is a fabulous player. It's just he didn't realize that my superpower being luck, that I was just going to win the roll, even though he had the +1, and I got to go first and charged him with 95 boys and my boss on turn 1. there's not much in the game that can withstand that. So, but I had some really good opponents going through.
Now, you might recall that magical live interview we had with Frankie G and Papa just a few moments ago. Well, Rich has a slightly different take on how that game went, and here he is describing it. Turns out there was more than just one turn, Frankie.
Round 5 against Frankie, I tell you that if in the last 2 rounds, Frankie and then Jeff, Frankie's list actually I feel was scarier for my list. But both guys are just these fabulous players who I've watched them play, and they just don't make many mistakes. And I did not realize how brutally tough those bikers could be. And Frankie's plan was pretty brilliant, and he came in, and his countercharge was devastating. I made a mistake that I didn't to jump the Ludas, but I think the turning point was when I was able to recycle 30 boys, bring them in behind him, and then the Orcs can just take the punch a little bit better than the Gene Stealer cult. And really it was just attrition, and my boys, having 30 more boys, made him laugh.
See, he wasn't even sweating a little bit there. I didn't sense any urgency, no scrambling against the clock, no late game comeback for Frankie. I mean, the War Boss tells it how it is. You know, Jeff will unfortunately not be able to rebut any of these points, but I'm sure Rich is going to give a nice, rich tableau of what was going on the top table at the Gentlemen and Ladies GT. He's got a couple clips here, and he's going to talk us through the game against Jeff. This, of course, comes down to a 1-point margin of victory for the great War Boss himself, Rich Gilton.
So I feel in the game against Jeff, I knew that his list was really strong, but that if I could block his movement with some of my chaff units, it's just that the Plague Bears just don't put out a lot of wounds. They just tie you up, and he was able to control the board early and was scoring. He got a significant lead, but early I was able to kill Mortarion and one of the Spider, the what are they called? The Lord's Discordant on turn 1, thanks to the shock attack gun going strength 12, which it might have done it one other time in the tournament, but that was the big one. But once I got those two, the 2 Lords Discordant were still terrifying. And so I just kind of had to play a waiting game until I could whittle them down enough to make my push. So then once they were down, I think I pushed probably a little too hard and too aggressive. I was going for, when I swung around in behind him, I advanced a really long advance and made a charge, which, because I'm lucky, I was able to hit his epitome, and that was my Kingslayer, which was a bad choice in my secondary. But I had to try and score some points, so I got 5 wounds on it. And then Jeff, if he had run that away, I might not have been able to catch him. But I think he felt like he needed the extra combat against the recycled unit of boys. And together, the 2 of them did not do very well. And then my boys picking both of them up in the same turn really was what gave me the center of the board. And then once I had the center of the board in the last couple of turns, I had some big scores. And then I had ground control because I felt like over time, my bosses were a good counter to his Spider, to his Lord's Discordant. And so was my shooting. So that over time, I eventually would get board control. I just had to be patient. And I was just 1 point patient enough. Against a great opponent like Jeff, I made a few mistakes, but lucky for me, he made a few very small mistakes as well. And but against an opponent of that caliber, it comes down to some lucky dice and then also some opportunities taken and some opportunities given.
And there's Rich talking through his last game against Jeff Robinson. That game was actually streamed on Facebook Live. If you were to just look for Gentlemen and Ladies GT on Facebook, you should be able to link your way around until you actually find the feed. We'll do our best to actually throw that in the show notes or actually on the link to the show on the Frontline Gaming webpage. We're almost through all of our Rich Kilton content. I just want to give him a chance because he has some really nice words to say about his top two opponents, Frankie and Jeff.
I also have to say one thing about especially Jeff and Frankie. You know, some people could try to play, because my list can struggle with the clock, some people could try to play to that advantage and, you know, make me try and clock out and make me do all the dice rolls. But both of those opponents were gentlemen in that they helped me, like, instead of making me come all the way around the table, they like helped me move units. They trade up some of my guys when I was going to recycle a unit on their turn. So, I mean, both were just amazing, high-caliber human beings besides being fabulous opponents. And I had so much fun playing both of them. And would anybody who questions the greatness of those players as people besides as players, they're wrong.
He's such a great guy. Like, this is, my God, like, I love this is why I love Warhammer. I say this, like, you know, once a month. I get into a point where something happens and I just say it. And this is one of those times. Just people like Rich, like what he's saying with Jeff and Frankie. And when you see it live, like, these guys are just pillars of the community. It's just friggin' great. I love it.
Actual quality human beings, as Rich said. And we're going to give one last final farewell here. We're going to round up the gentlemen and ladies, parenthesis, GT, now 40K Major, perhaps called the Milady Major in the future. We're going to give it to Rich here because this is the War Boss's first major win, from my understanding. And so I'll let him take it out before we move on to the Carolinas.
I have to say just how excited. There was a great tournament run by some fabulous guys on Father's Day. I missed my son, who hopefully he'll be back for that tournament. Will be his first tournament back with me next year because, like I said, I'm an old guy. I get to play with my kids at tournaments, which is great. So, but I've been playing since early second edition. So I love that sometimes some of my models are older than the guys I'm playing against. But this was my first major win in 8th edition, and I couldn't be happier. It was so fabulous an experience. I felt really great about the play. I love where the meta is right now. It seems like so many different lists have a chance, and I was glad to see, like, Aurelio and Reese had to play round 1 because that Imperial Guard matchup I don't like. I don't like Tau, so I dodged some of my tough matchups.
All right, so I guess we'll swing it on over now to the Carolina Crusade.
So coming to us from the home of racing's finest, Concord, North Carolina, home of Charlotte Motor Speedway, we have the Carolina Crusade. Hosted by Tony Pierce and Brandon Rogers, this was an ITC event with a whopping 61 attendees, making it the second largest of the weekend and a full-on major. But why should I do the intro when Tony can do it for us?
I am Tony Pierce, and I ran the Carolina Crusade in Charlotte, North Carolina. This event is the product of a pipe dream of a couple of locals who wanted to try their hand at running tournaments. This is the first year of an event of this size, and it was held at a local Embassy Suites hotel. If the ITC tracked ELO, this event would be stacked. We have 3 of the top 10 in attendance, Richard Siegler, John Lennon, and Daniel Hesters, as well as several heavy hitters from the southern region. Chris Blackham, Stephen Four, Austin Wingfield, and Thomas Bird. We also have lots of players who are more famous in the South that you probably may not have heard of, such as Jeremy Jackson, Alexis Putt, Brenton Weiss, and Phil Corman. We had many of the general staff in attendance, as well as large contingents from Brohammer and Team Battle Brothers. It's a very tough meta down here, and anyone wanting a shot at the top spot is going to have a very tough field to get through.
So, as Tony was saying, this was the first year for the event, and to provide further context on what went down, we're joined by a breathless internet commenter, Jimmy the Armchair.
Hey, wasn't this the event with the hot garbage terrain?
Yeah, but I mean, like...
That stuff looked like a bird crapped on 3 pieces of wood, and they called it a Nova L.
Listen, buddy, like
I'm looking at it now, and that's exactly what it was.
Okay,
hey,
but...
This terrain looks like it was made by a Space Wolf player drunk on grain alcohol and blinded by it.
Okay, well, are you almost done? Like, we got...
I mean, this looks like they huffed the paint before applying it. My Aunt Karen could make better stuff, and one of her eyes doesn't follow the other.
I mean, I guess you're right, but I mean, like, who takes a look at the London GT last year and says, well, hold my beer, I got this?
Okay. Low blow, man. How about we move on to the event coverage there, okay? What did the TO have to say about what went down?
Okay. Well, full disclosure, folks. Tony Pierce, the TO and event organizer, he is a friend and contributor to the podcast. He's been a big help to me in the past with stats, and just like a gentleman overall. He's got real broad shoulders, and he took the issues in stride. During and after the event, he did make announcements. One on Comp 40K, the Facebook page, to take full responsibility for the issue. This kind of blew up on the internet. There was a lot of pictures showing just kind of the lackluster terrain. All of the tables were essentially exactly the same. They were these kind of plywood L's that had been spray painted white with 4 or 5 other small line of sight blocking pieces in the corners. It didn't look super sweet.
I mean, players on a lot of the forums and places where people were posting about the terrain, which, granted, did not look so good. There were no mats on the tables. It wasn't the most aesthetically pleasing event, but I think the players were genuinely supportive of the people who did organize it and fought back against a lot of the armchair trolls on the internet because they were pretty grateful to have an event in the Carolinas that they could go to. And this is not an area that is usually serviced by a lot of GTs, and I think they're all hoping that they can pick it up and learn from the event and keep it, making it better. And definitely got some room to improve, and I'm sure Tony will. And I think he handled this up front and the best way possible. And I was really especially happy to see that the players appreciated the way the organizers handled it, despite it not being the best outcome, and went on and had a really good time at the event.
But outside of all this, there was a legitimate competitive event that took place. Like Tony said, we can't forget that the majority of the South's best players were in attendance. Like he mentioned, John Lennon, Richard Siegler, Richard Martin, most of the Brohammer team, which has been doing exceedingly well this year. Chris Blackham, General Staff, Austin Wingfield, Stephen Ford, Juice. It was, like he said, a ridiculously stacked event. When I was going through the list of player names, I recognized probably 90% of them as being, top tier players. So there was no shortage of strategy here. The event ended with Chris Blackham going 5-0 and winning using a paltry 9 Eldar flyers and taking the victory. Before we cut to a clip from Chris explaining exactly how he managed to pull it off, we'll go over his list. He ran a Cabal of the Blackheart Air Wing detachment.
Do you mind? Maybe I can take.
Are you sure, Val? I know that this one has fewer models, but
it's maybe I can handle it. Okay, here we go. I'm diving in. All right, so he had an Air Wing detachment, which was Drukari, Cabal of the Blackheart with 3 Razor Wing jet fighters. Nothing fancy on those guys. He then had another Air Wing detachment with 3 Crimson Hunter Exarchs with 2 star cannons each, also a Hemlock Wraith Fighter, and a Nightwing. We're going to have to get into that one. Crystal Targeting Matrix, Twin Bright Lance, and Twin Shuriken Cannon on that. And then he did have a battalion detachment, which included an Autarch Skyrunner with a Reaper Launcher, a Farseer Skyrunner, and a Warlock Skyrunner, as well as 3 troops, obviously, one unit of 20 Guardian Defenders with 2 heavy weapons platforms, a unit of 5 Rangers, and a unit of 8 Storm Guardians with chainswords, and holy heck, we got another flyer in the battalion, a Nightwing, again, with the Crystal Targeting Matrix, Twin Bright Lance, and Twin Shuriken Cannon. Ooh. You
did it, bud. You got through. How do you feel?
I feel like it's very hard to read lists, and I appreciate your skill. So shall we cut to that clip from Chris trying to walk us through his experience?
This is Chris Blackham here. I've just recently played at the Carolina Crusade. I sold my soul to Slaanesh. I played 9 Eldar flyers. I had 5 great games with 5 amazing opponents. I played some great guys. I played John with his Knights. I played Thomas with his Ultramarines, Alexis with her Harlequins, Phil with his just amazingly painted Imperium suit, and then my new friend Andrew with his Orcs. My MVP of the unit was Games Workshop's rules for Altatok. Without that rule, there would be no stupid abuse. And yeah, it was a great time, and I look forward to the next one.
Power and glory to Altatalk.
Altatalk for all your Eldar flyer needs.
Seriously though, what's up with that Nightwing? Have you actually looked this thing up?
Yeah, sure. So a Nightwing is it's very similar to the Crimson Hunter Exarch, except it's only got sorry, not the Exarch, the regular Crimson Hunter, just slightly better. So it's got the twin Bright Lance and the crystal targeting matrix. It allows it to ignore penalties to hit while it's flying, and I mean it's just another Eldar flyer. So it's got your vector shift, and so it's it can do the double pivot, and that's really what's most important about it, right? Is it takes up all of the board. It's got 2 strength 8 AP -4 D6 damage shots, and it's got those twin shuriken cannon, so it can put out a little bit of damage on chaff units as well. So it's just another Eldar flyer that's relatively well pointed. He's been running variations of this list since prior to the LVO, so I don't know who's actually going to be able to stop this madman other than maybe GW making some kind of modification to flyers. But not to be outdone, we did have 2 undefeated players other than Chris. Both were playing Tau. Brohammer buddies Richard Siegler and Richard Martin, and they were running very similar list. The Siege was kind enough to give us his thoughts on his list and the event for itself. For reference, did you want to give this Tau list a go, Val, or do you need me to step back in?
So he's got an Outrider detachment, Tau Empire. It's got an HQ, a commander, and an enforcer battle suit with an advanced targeting system and 3 cyclic ion blaster, accompanied by 2 shield drones. Second HQ slot is Dark Strider. He's got in the fast attack a Pathfinder team with the drones. He's got the Pulse Accelerator, Grav Inhibitor, and Recon drone, and 2 shield drones, as well as 4 Pathfinders along with the Shazwi. And then he's got another Pathfinder team, which is the same thing again. And then 3 units of tactical drones. Looks like 2 units of 7 and 1 unit of 8 shield drones. After that, he's got a Vanguard detachment. It's got another HQ, Enforcer Battlesuit with ATS and 3 cyclic ion, as well as 2 shield drone. And this list goes with the triple Riptide with advanced targeting system and target lock, rather than some of the other options you see out there. And then finally, a Supreme Command attachment with 3 Cadre Fireblades, another Enforcer with the Cyclic Ion, 2 Shield Drones, an Ethereal, all rounded out to be 2,000 points. Looks pretty sweet to me.
Yep, it's a very interesting list in that compared to most Tau lists, it has very little CP. I believe it tops out at 6 to start the game, which not a whole lot when you consider how most Tau players play. But it's been getting the job done, and Richard's been performing very well with this list and slight variations of it for a couple of months now. I believe he did manage to give us a couple clips about the list. Do we happen to have those on hand?
I believe this is Richard talking about one of his games, as well as a little bit about his list.
My most important game was Game 2 against Austin's Pioneering Chaos list. Austin is one of the best players in the South, and the new Slanesh Mirror is a nightmare matchup for Tau. But I got a bit fortunate towards the end of the game and was able to snipe some of his key characters. What is special about my list? The Pathfinder drones are an unusual choice, but I use them for early game screening, such as against Gallants and other fast-moving targets like Lord Discordance, and the Grav drone is a critical piece of my army against Genester Cult and other assault-heavy armies. My most valuable player, or MVP, was the Cyclic Ion Commanders. Mainly whenever I needed something to really die, the CIB commanders utterly destroyed them. They have insane damage output and are extremely reliable.
I would have to agree with him on Cyclic Ion Commanders. 3 Cyclic Ion Commanders is a whole lot of accurate firepower for Tau, because they are hitting on 2s and have a good volume of fire on the Cyclic Ions. So I'd have to say I agree with you, sir.
For sure, and they suffer very little penalty to overcharge them. So it's definitely a really good pick. One thing that a lot of people mention when they're talking about Richard's list is the sheer amount of 2 like 2 drone units that he takes. You'll see it if you go over the list either via 40kstats.com or check BCP. He's got 40 plus drones in this list, and the majority of them are 1 and 2 man units. In talking to a couple of his teammates and in listening to some of his talks on the list, at first blush, you would think that he's going to give up kill more just constantly, but he's very cagey with how he plucks his drones when he's playing against different players, and will often basically waste them all in one turn when he absolutely knows he's going to lose a kill more anyway. And then in other rounds, he will pick just like 1 from every unit of 2 off the board instead of picking a unit and denying the kill if he thinks it's possible. So there's a lot of cagey play there with the sheer amount of drones that he's playing. I do know that he helped Richard Martin with his list, and they're very similar. The placing of the drones is a little bit different, but really the main difference is that Martin was using velocity trackers on his Riptides to help in the flyer matchup versus that target lock for the Riptides, which makes them a lot more maneuverable on the board.
Regardless of whether or not you bring the velocity tracker, the biggest thing that's going to help this list is those cyclic ion commanders against flyers. Assuming they can get into range. I mean, limited range on that, but being able to hit on 2s for Tau is just a dream, and rarely ever happens outside of the commander model. So, I do like this. I've enjoyed seeing when players embrace no command points, and you can see that he's using a lot of the inherent buffing abilities of the Tau Codex, whether that be the marker lights. He's got very efficient marker lights in the Cadre Fire Blades, as well as the Pathfinder units, but also all those little rules that the Pathfinder drones provide. There's going to be other targets that people will be focused on trying to kill, namely shield drones, and maybe you get away with a few turns of having your recon drone do some fun stuff, or your grav inhibitor drone preventing some charges out of deep strike.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's a very crafty list. I really enjoy it. I really enjoy Tau in general right now, other than playing as them or against them. But from a meta perspective, it's no longer the same list over and over again that I'm seeing. There's all these new variants. There's Richard Siegler with all these drones and minimal command points. There's still the old Triptide with broadsides and as many CP as they can generate outside of that. And now there's all these mechanized lists coming out, Devon Swan and a few others playing these multi long strike lists, or even going the realm of piranhas and people playing 8 to 12 piranhas with just a million seeker missiles. It's like Richard was saying earlier about the meta, it's definitely moving into a very interesting place post Castellan, post Inari.
Finally, we would be remiss if we didn't have our fan favorite, Austin Wingfield, on once again to extol the virtues of his Chaos Stroganoff list, which is now 23-3 in Majors and GT play.
The Chaos list performed exceptionally well again. I believe I'm 18-2 now with it over the last couple weekends, so that's pretty solid. We lost this last weekend to Richard Siegler. He's one of the best Tau players in the game. I think he's 4th right now in the ITC rankings. Really close game. Talked myself into charging his Fortress of Tau turn 1, and shouldn't have declared what I did, and he was able to pick up a Discordant turn 1 for free. But really close game. The list does pretty well. I was able to trap some drones in combat with the Epitome and keep me in that game, but ended up losing in the end. But can't say enough about how fun the Discordants and Mortarion have been.
Austin giving us another update about the Discordants from the comfort of his Trans Am, ripping around down south of the Mason-Dixon.
We're now going to take you to the final event that we're going to cover today, the Spellemannens Sommersnur. It's a Swedish ETC team event that took place in Stockholm, Sweden. Only 22 players showed up, not quite a GT, not something we would normally cover, but the Google translated Culture Compound Games man Sommerspin was a veritable who's who of the area's finest players. LVO's top Necron player, Thomas Christensen, was there. Previous Westeros Coast multi-time major winner Andreas Berglund, and the absolutely dominant Carl Abramson, who's won, I think, 3 or 4 majors at this point this year already. The event was reportedly used as a testing ground for ETC event lists, hence why all the lists were kept off of BCP. And I'm told that those who know what was played there have been sworn to secrecy on pain of being given only light American beers at future events. Carl Abramson was the eventual winner, going 5-0, scoring 4 perfect 20-0 victories and a single 19-1 using the forces of the hive mind. And I have it on really good authority that the majority of the final round results had to be thrown out because the remaining players actually got too drunk to play. So stay classy, Stockholm.
A riveting tournament report from the edge of the world. I think that has gone and done it, Peter.
I think we did it.
That concludes our tournament coverage for the week. We done did it. So, you know what I realize we never really do is thank the people who take time out of their days to respond to my frantic messages and join us on this show. That actually is really important. So thank you, everyone who participated, all the players out there, the winners of this week. Congratulations. Any final things you'd like to say before we sign off?
Hey, no, I just want to say thanks again to everybody that's tuning in and giving us the great feedback. Big thanks to the people over at Best Coast Pairings for providing this awesome tool that I can use to deep dive all this data and all the other event tools out there as we go through into the future. Australia's got a couple big events coming up, as does the UK. Can't wait to be able to talk about them.
And just to put you on the spot, what might we be looking at next week as far as tournaments to cover?
Well, I believe we're looking at about 5 to 6 GTs and majors next week. It's going to be another busy one. I know that a popular favorite amongst the Chapter Tactics crew is going to be the Throne of War GT, because that's the first event that the Chapter Tactics Patreon has paid to send 2 of our lovely hosts to, in Sean Morgan and Pablo Martinez. So they'll be on the spot to provide actual coverage. Hopefully we'll be able to get some good clips from them, as well as the TO over in beautiful sunny Hawaii. Yeah, it's going to be a very busy weekend for me getting the stats all together for the next week's episode, but it's going to be a blast.
Awesome. So given it's a heavy week, we'll probably just be covering the top table matchups and lists. So we might limit the coverage. So if you are on a top table next weekend, please keep an eye out. We tend to reach out via Facebook Messenger or any other way that we can figure out to get a hold of you. If you're Frankie, you might even have us call you at work. So thanks for listening. Have yourselves a good day and or evening. Peter?
Bye-bye.
This has been 40K Stat Center, a presentation of the Frontline Gaming Podcast Network. Like what we do? Subscribe to and rate us on YouTube and wherever podcasts can be found. Join the conversation. Follow 40K Stat Center on Facebook. You can also support the show directly by joining the Chapter Tactics Patreon and competitive 40K in general via the ITC Patreon, or by grabbing a subscription to BCP.